Hey, y'all, I'm Shane Sams. Thanks for listening to my podcast today. Super excited to talk to another incredible expert author or successful entrepreneur so that you can learn what they are doing or have done to find that success out in the world. Really pumped up about today's guest. My guest today is Andrew Warner, the founder of Mixergy.com and the host of the Mixergy podcast. Back in 2017, man, I had the great privilege of being a guest on the Mixergy podcast with my wife, Jocelyn. You can Google that. Just search for how two rural Kentucky school teachers built a life-changing online business, or Shane and Jocelyn Sams at Mixergy. Plus, we can put a link to that in today's show notes. Got to know Andrew, became a fan of Andrew, and it has been amazing watching him grow over at Mixergy. Andrew is one of the OG entrepreneur podcasters out there, guys. You're going to learn today that he got started back in like 2006. Barely anybody knew what a podcast was, let alone how to make one. We're going to talk about how he got started in the entrepreneur podcasting game. And then we are going to talk about all things podcasting. We're going to talk about how to find and land amazing guests for your podcast. We're going to talk about growing your podcast audience. How do you go out? How do you get more people to listen to your show? We're going to talk about podcast monetization, how you're going to make a living as a podcaster. And also, we're going to talk about Andrew's new book, Stop Asking Questions, How to Lead High-Impact Interviews and Learn from Anyone. Andrew Warner is a fascinating guy, man. He's one of the best podcast hosts on the planet. He is an expert in communication and conversation, and he's got some wild habits, y'all. Get this. He has ran marathons on all 7 continents, including Antarctica. And I'm pretty sure he may be the only person in history to record a podcast on all 7 continents, including Antarctica as well. And I know these tips and all these things that we're talking about podcasting are going to be helpful for you, whether you're a YouTuber, a blogger, any kind of content creator. You are going to love today's show with Andrew Warner of Mixergy. So wherever you're listening in, man, go pour yourself a cup of coffee, maybe a mason jar of sweet tea, get a pen and paper, take some notes, sit back, relax, enjoy the show. Three, two, one. Andrew, what is happening, my man?
Hey, good to be here.
Tell me about running. Tell me, we'll come back to this. This is my callback for later. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about running marathons. What in the world did you get yourself into?
No, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to get a story out of me, because in the book I say the best way to get people to tell a story is to ask about one thing. I don't mean to come in here and just tell you your business, but if you're asking about broad all marathons, people are going to say, including me, they're all great. You think that it's going to be easy, then it's fun. And then after mile 20, it feels tiring. And then in the end, you feel like you're never going to do it again, but you have to. No, the way to do it is to say, Andrew, tell me about a marathon that stands out. Tell me about one marathon where you almost didn't finish.
This is what we like to call foreshadowing, everyone, of what we're going to talk about later with Andrew's book.
This is what we like to call Andrew's a jerk. He comes onto the podcast, instead of saying, thanks for being on, he corrects the first one. Here's the last marathon that I did. We left San Francisco, and I had this sense that I had to do one more solo marathon through San Francisco. And I was building up over the last year kind of slowly. And then one day I took my little action camera with me, and I said into the camera, I'm going to go do a run and let's see how many different parts of San Francisco I can see. And then I ran through the Mission and how much it changed over COVID with the outdoor dining. And it was kind of exciting to see all those changes. I love outdoor dining in San Francisco. They basically taken over parking spots and parking lots, actually. And they've turned it into outdoor dining. It feels great. So I shot that. And then I shot a video of myself running through the Castro. And that was exciting because the Castro is always exciting. You know, people are dressed up in different outfits, rainbow flags everywhere. Usually people making out that day. No one was making out. This woman gave me the rainbow. What is it called? I don't know. One of these really puffy scarves. It was great. I ran with that. Anyway, I just kept running through the street with my little action camera, filming the whole thing. And at some point I said, I think I could do 20 miles. And I went on the Golden Gate Bridge, and I went through every little site that influenced me and that I would have wanted to see before I came to San Francisco. And that was the last marathon that I did. And it was my way of closing out the San Francisco chapter of my life, of seeing all the startup offices as I ran, of seeing all the places where I was. And now we're looking for the next phase of our lives, Olivia and I.
Mm. And I've watched your journey, this marathon journey, and to see you go to Antarctica and run a marathon, like that was one of the most like out of the box things I think I've ever seen scroll through my timeline. Basically, it was like you see people run marathons, you see people run them in different states, you see people do all this, and then you're in the desert of the tundra of whatever it is in Antarctica. What was the inspiration for doing that? Just to run you recorded podcasts on every continent.
Yes, I did.
You have to be the only person that's done that. That has to be a world record.
I gotta be the only person to have done that.
Yeah.
By the way, I didn't even know that Antarctica was a desert. I thought deserts were all hot and sunny. It turns out if there's little to no rain, it's a desert. Antarctica is largely a desert. Years ago, I saw this thing in a runner's magazine about people who are running a marathon on every continent. And I wrote in my journal, in the next 10 years, I'm going to run a marathon on every continent. And I accidentally discovered the journal entry when I went through my Evernote account looking for something. And I said, wait, it's almost 10 years and I didn't do it. I've got to do it. And I loved Antarctica. It was beautiful. As soon as I left, I started dreaming of going back. It's like no other place in the world. You can't even live there on your own. You need people to set things up, tell you where the cracks are so you don't fall. It's that barren and that untamed and undeveloped. But when I look back at the videos that I made over the year, just my experience with what it took to get there, that was the part that was really exciting for me. The idea that I started out that year, 2019, with the goal of running a marathon on every continent, that Antarctica was out of reach because you have to book flights in advance, because you can't just get on a United flight and go to Antarctica, because you need special permission, because there are international treaties about it, because there's a wait list. And then I had to make phone call after phone call to push and come up with crazy ideas. Can I do this? What if I do that? To me, that was the most exciting part when I look back, that I had this goal, I had this vision, and I could just keep pushing this one thing through the end of the year and not stop until I did it. And that's the one thing I carry. Well, one of the big things that I carried away from that year.
Do they land in like an airport or something? Or do you land at that science station? Or like, how do you get in there? Do you just land on the ice when you land?
You do. It's really? It's amazing. So first of all, there's a lot of bad weather. So you get to Chile, the southernmost part of South America, and you have a flight day, but they tell you right away, Antarctica is not like the beach. You can't just land whenever you want and expect the sun to be out. There was a horrible storm there. They couldn't take off to go to Antarctica. It was every day, just wait and see and wait and see and wait and see. And then finally they give you a call and you have to, within hours, if I remember right, be ready to get on a plane. And it's this old Soviet plane that can take off at a regular airport in Chile and then land on the ice in Antarctica. And there's this organization that helps people who either are there to do scientific work or to do these expeditions. They're there to keep them safe, to make sure that they report in, to make sure that there's a helicopter to get them if they get into trouble, to help them identify where the cracks are going to be and how to get out of cracks. And so they were taking these expeditioners on a flight. And I said, can I come there and run a marathon on my own on one of your flights? And they said, yeah, we'll make room for you. And I got on one of their flights and got to Antarctica.
That's pretty cool, man. I was imagining you when I saw the picture you posted. I was imagining you like they were running in the wilderness and it's like Star Wars. All of a sudden the big storm comes in, the ice monster grabs you. Now you're trapped in some cave somewhere.
Lucky that didn't happen. I'm so lucky you didn't talk to me like that. I would have prepared for it. No, none of that. It was, but they were worried about me. They were just, their job was to keep everyone safe. And so they constantly were making sure that I wasn't, going off where I wasn't supposed to go. Or
do you still run, or are you kind of done running the long distance?
I do.
Stuff?
No, I did that marathon just about, must be now 45 days ago or so.
Oh, okay. It was recent. That's good.
I haven't run since we got to Austin, but I've only been in Austin, Texas for about 10 days. Yeah. So it's early and I'm trying to get the family comfortable here. I don't know if I'll run here as much as I usually run, but I've been running now for the majority of my adult life. I should find a way to do it here. And I've run in Austin. It's just not fun. So if it doesn't work out, I'll switch to swimming.
I love how it is it's a little hotter down there than it is running around San Francisco probably, but I love how our life turns in chapters, like you and sometimes like you find that callback, like you were sifting through Evernote And like that was the spark that turned the chapter into this marathon adventure. And you did that, and you're kind of closing the chapter in San Francisco and turning the chapter to Austin. But I guess if we go back in time, your real first chapters were on this big journey you're on right now is Mixergy and the podcast, and just doing 2,000 episodes with all these amazing people. And now you've got this book coming out about, how to do these kind of interviews and stuff. So what turned the chapter into Mixergy? What were you doing before that, and how did that even start?
The very first thing I did out of school that was significant was I started an online greeting card company, and the thing took off. We did over $30 million a year in sales. My brother and I had our lives transformed because of it. We both co-founded it. And then after selling it, I took some time off and did nothing. And my way of getting back into the world was organizing these events for business people. And I thought, well, we could use a better invitation app for it. So I started investing in that and building that up. And at some point I realized this is not working. The one thing that was working about it was I was interviewing people who were coming to my events, the ones that I was hosting using my own invitation software. And I loved it. I loved talking to the entrepreneurs who were coming in. And I said, all right, I'm going to scrap the software and I'm going to keep the interviews, and I'm going to learn from the interviews what I can about building a better company. And I just kept interviewing, and that became this passion. And we're talking about the early days. I don't even think there was podcasting available on iPhones. I think we're talking about entrepreneurs not being people who you admire, but being these weirdos who were almost considered unemployed,
right?
Who I was interviewing because I was fascinated by them, and they were listening because they were fascinated by other entrepreneurs too. And so it started to build up, and the credibility built up. And one of the things that I do is I'm such a systemized person about certain things. And when it came to interviews, I would ask questions and find I couldn't get people to respond to me. They'd close off, and I'd have to go back and say, why? What could I have done differently? How could I make it work? And I started writing down what I thought could work. And if it worked out, I'd name it, and then I'd add it to a little guide that I kept for myself. And if it didn't work out, I'd talk to other people on the team, our producers, my interview coaches, the people who I've worked with, and say, why didn't this work? Let's come up with a better way. And then I'd try a couple of different ways. And then if they worked, I'd add them to the guide. And the whole idea was I wanted for myself to have a good set of systems for having conversations that matter, that can go in deeper than the average conversation.
Yeah. What year was that you started Mixergy? How long ago was that?
I think we started it. The company started 2006 with invitations. I got to get scales from your dinosaur coat off there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, was there even podcast software then? Like that was before podcast. There was podcast software, and it wasn't very good, but it was used by. So again, I did it a little bit after 2006 when I started. But you have to have something called, I think it was called Lemon or something, that was created to help you download. And then you'd shift it to your iPod, which is why it was called podcasting, because you're broadcasting into an iPod. And then it kind of became more and more accessible on other devices. The thing is, though, it was a weird platform, but it was also a very geeky platform. And there's certain things that will call people in even when the things aren't ready. So for example, you look at crypto today.
Yeah.
Crypto is pulling people in who are super smart, even though as an intelligent person, you could look at it and go, this is clearly not working. It's not better than the alternative. In many ways, you have to do so much to make it better. And still, smart people are on there, and it's worth paying attention to because smart people are willing to do it and to get geeky about it. Same thing with podcasting. You could clearly have said back then, the radio is almost as good for shows, and it's infinitely easier to listen to. Who would deal with podcasting? Well, there are a lot of startup entrepreneurs who went on to great success who are listening, and they're willing to go through it. And those are the people who are at the start of every revolution. And so I was lucky that the revolutions that I was a part of was the startup revolution, where entrepreneurs are suddenly cared about, where podcast revolution, people who were broadcasting were worth listening to if they found the right audience.
Yeah, I found podcasting in about 2010 is when I really started listening to it. And then we started our first podcasts in like 2012. And man, it was like a week-long process of figuring out how to even get it to show up somewhere. And I can't even imagine go back 5 more years. And then now you literally can just press a button on an app and you can start a podcast, So the only way to differentiate, it's not just being about, I think in some ways it used to be it was kind of a barrier to entry. So it was like an unfair advantage if you could figure it out, And now it's just like, you better have good content. You better have good interviews. You better have good people, because if you're not doing that, now you got a lot of competition out there. So you got to really step up your game at all times in the podcast world,
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So tell me about how the Mixergy podcast grew. One, I've always loved the name of your domain name, Mixergy. Did you just come up with that, or did that mean something to you?
The
guys,
original events were called Mixers. LA had this thing where if you were a group of people who are not friends in the beginning and were just kind of mixing it up, it was called Mixers. And so I kind of went with that word because I like to mix things up. And then there was a synergy to getting together with people and an energy in the room. And so I merged the two words to come up with a name that was unique to me, because I didn't want to have to battle other people for the name.
Yeah. And it's awesome because that's like a 1-word domain, but it's kind of your word. It's a your word domain, right? Not just my word domain. It's the way you made it up. So it's your 1-word domain. And that's how it became the brand. And, but how did you grow it in the beginning? Was it just be prolific, have great interviews, put stuff out there? And how are you growing it now? How are you growing audience? I know this is the biggest struggle that a lot of podcasters have out there, is how do I get listeners? How do I get in front of people? There's some really good shows with really small audiences. How'd you grow in the beginning, and what's happening now in your growth strategy?
The thing that I found in the beginning was, if I could hook in with a community that already existed, then they will start, and I interview the heroes of that community. Then it'll start to spread in that community and can go from there. And so I was a part of the Santa Monica or Los Angeles startup community, and I'd start to interview people who were part of that community. And so it was people like Jason Calacanis, who is now one of the top angel investors. And it was the founder, Greg Spiridelis, the founder of Jib Jab. And it was people who are much lesser known outside of the tech world, but were well known. And I could tell because when I'd be at parties, they were the ones that everyone wanted to talk to. That got me to a few hundred listens, maybe even 100 listeners per episode. Especially since I could just go back into that community and talk about it and ask them to talk about it within that community. Then I started to look for bigger online communities. One of the ones that helped me grow tremendously was Y Combinator. They had Hacker News, and I got on it, and I'd interview the people who were big in that community. And then I'd come back and tell them, hey, I interviewed this person who we all talked about yesterday, and here they are today. And I think to an extent that still works today for me and for others. You can see that there's certain Reddit communities where things just take off like fire. And if you're like me and you, where you've got the mic set up anyway, and it wasn't ever a big deal for me to be able to hit record and go, I could send a message to somebody and say, can I interview you about this thing that's going on? I saw how hot you were and how angry you were in that comment. Can we go on and do an interview right now? All right, not now. How about in 5 minutes? And I always, when I ask people if I could do something with them, I say, can I do it? And I pick a time. It's really painful to say, can I do it? Have them say yes, and then try to go back and forth on time. And I did that for interviews. I would say, can I interview you today at 2:00 via whatever system, right? I much rather that they come back and say, I'm busy at 2:00, because now we've shifted the conversation to talking about the time instead of whether they'll do it or not. Same thing, by the way, we're in Austin. I want my kids to get to know other kids here. I've got the names of parents of kids that they might be friends with. I'm emailing them or text messaging them. And I don't say, hey, our kids should play together sometime. What do you think? I say instead, can our kids play together on Monday? Yeah. Get a date right on the books. Let's see if we can make that specific time. And so I would do that. And the simplicity is important. I eventually hired people. I'm now in an Airbnb. So it's obviously not the office. Boy, that cushion is way out of place. That's bothering me that we just left it like that.
Don't be OCD, man. I got a blanket on a heater. I got 3 dogs laying behind me. We're good. I promise. It's all good, man.
I don't love, I do like that I've got this light that I can travel with because it's on and off raining today. Anyway, But I eventually hired someone to come into my office and set up my camera and my mic. And the way that I found them, by the way, was great. I just went onto a site where you're supposed to find photographers. I reached out to the photographer and I said, I don't need you to photograph my wedding. I don't need you to photograph my company. I need you to come in here and show me how, if you worked here, you would set up the lights. And he started teaching me about lights. He started teaching me about placement. He was really into it. He brought his own equipment over, and then I bought whatever of his equipment I liked from Amazon and set it up. And what I had was one request for him. I said, I want to be able to just hit record and go. I don't want it to be, I have to move out of my chair, go to another place, just hit record and go. And if you could have that velocity to creation be as fast as possible, I think that it's much easier to create. And so when someone was doing something online, I could then reach out and say, hey, I saw that thing. Can we do an interview right now? Can we do an interview 2 minutes? Yeah.
And that just bulks up the interviews. And also too, one thing I tell people, you have to, I don't know the best way to say this. You have to piggyback off of the people you've talked to. Like you have to say, let's say the example I give is when I first started my football coaching podcast. I knew some people, but I couldn't nail anybody down. So I went and got the 7th grade defensive coordinator at my local middle school. That's who I did. And then, so I got him, right? And then I would go, then that got me, hey, I just interviewed this dude. Yep. How about the DC of the next school, right? The defensive coordinator. And then, but then like, it was funny, within like 7 weeks, I had this guy who was like a CrossFit legend who had just done something crazy at the CrossFit games, and he was in the NFL. So I was like, hey, I have a football podcast. Check out all these coaches I've interviewed. Didn't say any names. And I said, why don't you come on? He comes on. Okay. The next week, there was this guy on College Game Day. They did a feature on him. He always went for it on 4th down as a high school coach. He was world famous for this. And he had just had this game day feature. I saw him on game day, and I reached out and I said, hey, last week I interviewed this guy. You want to come on my show that Monday? And he came on, and I'm interviewed the Monday after. He's on College Game Day. He's on my little podcast. And then it just went crazy. I started getting Hall of Famers, college football coaches.
Why do you think he said everything. Yes?
I honestly think it's 50-50. I think it's 50-50. A lot of people probably thought to ask him, and they just didn't. And I had the guts to just send it out. I told him I had seen him. I was paying attention. And I think the other half was he got to see, hey, this guy actually does interview coaches. I don't think he cared even who it was. Maybe it was because that guy was famous and he knew him. But I think it was just he had something to look at. Like if I had waited for a good guest, quote unquote, he would not have been able to go there and say, oh, he's got 20 other football coaches. He doesn't care they're high school coaches or middle school coaches. So I'm a guy that does this. That makes sense that he would say yes to me,
Yeah.
What do you think? Is that what you found?
I do think that having some traction, nobody wants to be first if they've got a reputation. There's no reason for them to. I think that people who are what I consider superstars are more likely to say yes to smaller places if it adds to their credibility, if they're on a promotional tour anyway, if it gives them an outlet to get out their point of view, And so I think that we either reach just for the top people right from the start and we ignore everyone else, or we completely ignore them because we don't think we could get them. But I think it's important to have the mix. Here's the way I do it. What I've noticed is I look at my stats every year. It's never the superstars who get the biggest downloads. It's never the people who have big names, big audiences, big followings. It's never them because they've been interviewed a million times, right? So I interviewed the creator of the company behind League of Legends. It's huge. There are people who watch their games more people watch their what Twitch is it called? I forget the event. One of their big annual events. More people watch that than the Super Bowl. And still, so he obviously has a massive following. He obviously created something that's huge. The problem is when I Googled his name and the word interview, I came up with 660,000 hits, right? Which tells me that I'm not the only one. It doesn't really make enough of an impact. Meanwhile, if I'll interview a small entrepreneur who does especially well in a community, boom, that community will send new people in addition to the fact that if they've already vetted that person and they like them in that community, they're a good indicator that the rest of the community will that other people like them will like them. So for example, if someone on Indie Hackers just blows up, Indie Hackers is big now in the tech startup scene. If I see that there's someone everyone's talking about who's like this unknown small person they're all rooting for, reach out to that person. I get them to say yes to doing an interview. And now that community on Indie Hacker says, hey, there's our guy who's now on Mixergy. And they go and listen. And they're also good indicators of what the rest of the startup world will think. If they've considered this person and they like them, other entrepreneurs would like.
So when you say start, that's an interesting delineation. If you say stars, you're saying stars in the community, not necessarily the star who started the community. And I actually lived through what you just said. Like when we were featured on the Smart Passive Income podcast with Pat Flynn on episode 122. And it blew up. It straight exploded. And for years, we were the most downloaded episode of this SBI podcast, like more than like Gary Vee or any of those guys, because we were just two people from Kentucky randomly who started this website, and it blew up. And then we have found that in our community. Like even in this podcast, I interview a lot of amazing people. My other podcast significantly can get more downloads because I'm interviewing normal people from my community. Like I got this guy named Kenny Triano. He joined my community and he launched this membership site about raising backyard chickens. Like he has this huge community of backyard chicken raisers. It's hilarious. And it's by far one of the most downloaded episodes of anything I've ever put out there, because it's a dude making a living on chickens in his backyard. Like that's fascinating. And he wasn't featured anywhere else. So there's no real competition for that story.
Yeah. I think of it as you have the monopoly on the chicken dude. Anyone who cares about that, you are the person that they're going to. For me, one of the people that I've got a monopoly on is a guy named Andrew Burnett Thompson. He's a guy who all he does is doesn't sound sexy, doesn't sound like it would be a big attraction. He owns a company called SideChart. Like, who would know that the guy who owns a software that makes charts for other software makers would be at all interesting? But he told the story online, and what he did was he had to work nights and weekends to teach himself to code. He would literally be on the train to work with a laptop trying to code up his site, right? You picture that dude. And the thing worked, and it started producing real money. And so people in the startup community went and saw him or read his story and liked it. And I knew then that there was an appetite for him. I interviewed him. He became a much bigger guest than any of my other guests for 2019. So wow. That's the thing that we're looking for. You want to have a monopoly on these people that are incredibly exciting for a small group of people that matter. But I will say this too. I should say too, that we also want superstars. We want the superstars, the people who are recognizable, whose name will stand out, whose name you could put on your website, who when you're saying I interviewed and you list them, people say, oh, I know them, and say, I want to be interviewed by Shane. I want to be interviewed by Andrew because Andrew interviewed them. Yeah. And also too, I find that it makes people not say no. Like that's when you reach out to eventually that stacks up so high. Like I rarely have people say no because I've interviewed so many amazing people that are recognizable, and these other people too. Like it just stacks to a point where you're just like, you can get into any interview if you want to. And that's really helpful when you start, but you have to start by stacking up. It doesn't just go there. Like you don't just get two big names. You have to have what do you call it? I would call it the podcast street cred of everything. You got to soar with the eagles and slither with the snakes and go everywhere in between. But you got to have that on your podcast if you're going to be able to like really make it. I think it needs to be a good mix. Yeah. I think that it needs to be these undiscovered people that are just great, and it needs to be these mega names that you gravitate towards. And if you have that mix, they each do their part. One brings you reputation and brings you other guests. The other will bring you a bigger audience, and it feeds off each other. Okay, we get them in the chair. Now we got you on the Zoom. We got you on the Zencaster. We got you on the tech. So let's talk a little bit about, the actual interview process. I know this is a struggle for a lot of people. I know we have a lot of people who build brands in our community, and it's like getting people into the podcast world of now you're the Conan O'Brien. Now you're the whoever, right? You've got to interview these people. It freaks people out. Right. So talk to me about the book, especially like the process you're laying out, and what do you do to make sure that you are facilitating an absolutely great interview? One thing that I learned to do is, since you're facilitating, stop asking questions. The reason we came up with the title, Stop Asking Questions, is I realized that a lot of podcast hosts, a lot of conversationalists, a lot of interviewers are annoying and they don't understand why. And it took me a while to understand why. And the way that I realized it was my wife took me to this beautiful house in Southern California, overlooking the ocean, giant pool. It's like one of these things that belongs on television. She's going and talking to her friend. I'm left talking to her friend's husband, and we're kind of chatting about nothing. And then somehow we get to a question that was phrased better than this, but it was basically, how the hell did you afford this place? He starts telling me about how he makes these apps for phones. And I start asking him, where'd you start? How did you get your idea? How'd you build up? And he tells me about how he's started because he realized that there needed to be apps on the BlackBerry. And before anyone cared about apps, he was making apps for the BlackBerry. And then that helped take off. And then other companies and so on and so forth. And at some point he says, Andrew, why don't you go get me a beer? And I realized he was seeing me as like this needy, annoying kid who was asking questions, or maybe even not annoying, but this needy kid who was asking questions instead of a peer, which is how we started out the conversation. Two guys hanging out while our wives are talking. And I thought later on, what was it about that interaction that made it change? He clearly enjoyed talking to me. It wasn't like he wanted me to go away and told me, go get a beer. What was it? And I realized it's all I was doing was asking questions. Where'd you get your idea? How'd you come up with it? How'd you get your next customer? How much? Right?
A very taker position is what it sounds like.
That's another way to look at it. Yeah. And so in interviews, I realized I did the same thing. I kept asking questions because I felt that's what an interviewer's job was. Don't be rude. Don't tell them. Ask them. And I said, well, you know what? What if I try not asking? What if I try saying? What if instead of, where'd you get the idea for your business? I say, tell me how you got started. Tell me where you got the idea for the business. What if I rephrase some of my questions as statements? And this was clearly an intentional laid out thing that I was doing and then evaluating the transcript of. I spent thousands of dollars on transcripts, especially back in the days when it was expensive to get transcripts. And then I looked at it with people that I paid hundreds of dollars to for each coaching session to understand what was going on. And what we discovered was if you switch from questions to directions, people respect you more and they trust you to guide them, which makes sense. As a guest, someone's sitting with you and what they want is the confidence that you will help tell their story, the confidence that you could lead them to something great for their audience. You don't know their audience as well as they do. You have to trust them well enough to do you service and take you right into their audience's hearts. And someone who's, where should I go? Doesn't have that kind of confidence any more than if you decided to go to National Park with a tour guide and the tour guide said, should we go left or right? Would you like to go and see a tree or another tree, right? You want them to say, now we're going to go over to the left and then we're going to go to the right. And occasionally say, by the way, do you prefer this or that? That's what we're looking for. And the book that you're talking about, Stop Asking Questions, is named because of that. But the whole idea was, let's take all the lessons, all the things that I've experimented on over the last thousands of interviews and see if I could just lay them out, name them, and give them as techniques for interviewers and frankly, conversationalists. I've got salespeople now. Go figure. There's a sales organization that's asked me to come in and just talk to them and say, can you show our people how to get clients to be more open?
Adjacent opportunities, baby. Adjacent opportunities coming out of the woodwork.
So we've never seen this. We've never seen anyone do this. What if we could be the first organization to use this in sales? And I say, this is great.
That's amazing, man. It made me think like when I first started talking to or interviewing people I really respected, right? And when we get someone who we've probably deservingly so, they're on a pedestal in our mind. And I think a lot of podcast hosts find this when they get into podcasting, experts, authors, entrepreneurs, whatever. You kind of get this nervous thing and you forget that these people are coming onto your show and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what's going on. You were on their schedule. Right. They're doing this. They need the guide. They don't need someone going. They don't need one more person saying, you're so awesome.
Right.
I love you. You know, like they need a guide. And that's what you're saying is be the guide, take charge. And guide them through their story. I actually had this amazing privilege recently. Pat actually let me interview him on his podcast on the 500th episode. He called me and he was like, hey, we're going to do a flip the script episode. I'm going to bring a past guest on. You're going to take me through my story. And as I was researching this to do this for Pat, I started looking back through the hero's journey. I really wanted to guide him through the hero's journey. And it made me really think about how I was talking to everybody, because I was like, man, why am I not doing this for everybody? Why am I not taking them, guiding them, telling them how to get through this journey so that at the end of it, they've told their story, but it doesn't even feel like it. It feels authentic. It feels like a conversation. It doesn't feel like a FBI interrogation room with a lamp swinging in front of their head. It actually is kind of like a guided kind of thing. Do you think it's still good though to have a like we have the good mix of guests? Could it be a good mix too though to have you have questions built into this as well? Like maybe follow-ups or something like that. Where? Let me ask you this.
No.
Where's the place for questions is what I'm asking.
I think it's a good mix. I'm not saying that the whole thing should be do this. I think it should be a good mix. I think that we should though own our responsibility in conversations as a guide and understand that that means sometimes we rephrase. We don't ask things as questions. We ask them as statements. I'll give you another one, by the way, one that is even simpler. One of the best questions that I ever got was something that, well, I stole it. I stole this best question from Charlie Rose. Charlie Rose used to be a great interviewer before he got into trouble for, I think it was sexual harassment or something, but he still is a phenomenal person to study for interviewing. He used to be so long-winded that there was a Saturday Night Live sketch on how he would not stop asking this question. It went on for so long that his guests would stand up and walk away going, I can't deal with this. It's too much. So that's the way he was in the early days. Towards the end of his career, he was such a good interviewer that his hour-long interviews were studied, that they were phenomenal. They would get people who otherwise would just give shallow interviews like actors and get them to go deep. And I started studying him. I had his interviews transcribed and I looked, what was he doing? And at the end, what he was doing was he turned a long question into a one-word question, which was because, just like that. Yeah. And so if someone's talking about how I had to do this, I had to start my company, I needed it, and we ran it, and this and that, and you just say, because in the right spot, you get them to explain why they did it. If they're telling you what they did, just slipping in a because, even if they're still talking, you can just say it in there, because you're not interrupting their flow too much, but you're redirecting them towards the meaning, the depth. And I think that the more we start to understand that we can go with the real question, we can go with the guiding statement, we can go with the single word, the more we start to pull all this together, the better our conversations are. And again, this is great for podcasting, great for interviewing, but dude, come out for dinner and you're going to see the exact same thing at play, especially if you've seen me at all talk about these techniques and you see it. A stranger becomes a friend who you get to know better than their 10-year-old friends that they've known for 10 years know, because you know how to get at the heart of who they are. You know how to understand why they do what they do and how to guide the conversation so that it's interesting.
Yeah. And the great thing you said there, I love the becoming a friend, like in conversation with a stranger. But that's the power really of podcasting in particular, is unlike any other medium, YouTube, whatever, your listeners become your friends. And if they can hear you becoming friends, becoming a part of this guest's life, you become a part of their life because they feel like they're in the car with you. You two are in the front seat and they're in the back. And if you can harness, like, I'm looking forward to your book, man, because I think harnessing that is really the power of podcasting and the power of what you're telling people how to do. If you can become a guest that could become a friend to your listener, your podcast can't do anything but grow. It's going to have to go to the next level. You know, tell me about real quick, and then I want to figure out when the book's coming out, how everybody can get a hold of it. But monetization in podcasting. I just gave a talk at Podcast Movement about monetizing a podcast. We put a lot of time and energy in podcasting. Podcasting does take real time. Like me and you are here from 2 to 3 today. Like that cannot be escaped. You can't hack that, right? So you got to have money to support the mission. Talk to me about monetization, growth over the years, maybe a couple things you've done, or maybe some of the best things you've done to monetize the Mixergy podcast.
I started out with advertising, like a lot of other people. The way that I got ads was by reaching out to people who I saw who were already buying ads. For me, it was FreshBooks. I saw that they were buying ads and I reached out to them and I said, I don't want to sell you ads. I just want to know, what are you doing? How are you buying ads? And sure enough, someone at FreshBooks actually just walked me through it. They said, yeah, my whole job is to buy ads. Started walking me through, doing screen sharing, telling me where he bought ads, why they were working. I thought for a while there, was he doing something he's not supposed to, revealing stuff he's not supposed to? Is he helping me? And should I feel guilty for this? And then I realized, no, his job is to buy ads. He gets paid to buy ads that overperform, right? And if he can cultivate me as a new platform that he could advertise with, right? If you're one of the first places to advertise, one of the first companies to advertise on a platform, you're more likely to get results because you stand out. If he could get me to understand what he's looking for and to start creating for him, it makes sense for him. And so he taught me, he showed me. And then once we were done, I said, I think I could deliver. I think I could deliver what you're talking about. Because I even said, what are you paying per customer? And he gave me a number. I said, I think I could do that. What if we try this experiment? You buy an ad with me and I guarantee that I'll charge you. And then I guarantee that you'll get the right number of customers from it. And if you don't have to pay me. And he said, no. I said, wait, I'm guaranteeing it. How could you say no? I kept coming back to him with it. I actually found the emails and I sent it over to the team at FreshBooks, the invoice software, and they smiled at it. But he finally said, okay, sure, I'll do it. There was no risk. Just buy the ads. All I ask is give me feedback. Tell me if we're actually delivering. And they bought the ads and they gave me feedback and it actually delivered. They got the number of people that they needed for the price that I was charging, which I think was $600 for the first ad. So now I had my ad price, $600. And $600, I think, got them 3 ads to give you a sense of where I was. Great. Now I can go to other people and say, FreshBooks bought for $600, 3 ads.
That same thing as the guesting.
For them. Right. Exactly. Yep. Here's the person you should go contact. Tell them that I sent you. Sunir will vouch for me. And if you like it, let's do it. And so that's where the advertising started. What I'm finding for podcasting, by and large, unless you're one of the biggest podcasters out there, having your own product is going to produce more revenue than 100%. Having advertising. Yep. And for me, truthfully, over the years, it's gone back and forth. But you can see that podcasters will have some kind of digital educational product or other product. And for me, it was a membership site. I wanted to have predictable revenue. I wanted to have ongoing relationship with my audience. And when I wanted to create a membership site, I didn't have anything to offer. So I said, I'm just going to test it and I'm going to sell access to all my past interviews. And I actually even said, pick your own price, pay what you think it's worth, pay what you want to support with. And I had people pay $10 a month. I had people pick to pay $100 a month. And there's some people who pay $10 a month who are still paying $10 a month now. It's been about 10 years continuously. And so that became another source of revenue. Occasionally I'll do other things, but those are the 2 big pillars of the business.
Yeah, that's what that was my main point of my talk is we monetize our audience by turning them into a paid community, and like I have found for us, that's the best consistent, predictable revenue that we have found. Although I have now considered, as our audience has gotten big enough to consider this, I have considered ads. But I think I would rather do ads I would rather have ads from other podcasters, like do reads for other shows. I think that's what I would pursue is how can I would like to support other podcasters by giving them their leads and things like that.
I think that's a great idea, by the way. I think that somebody needs to create the podcast promotion swap.
Yeah.
Where at the end of an episode, you could say, now that this episode is over, in the show notes, we've got a link over to Andrew's podcast, or maybe here's a clip from Andrew's podcast. I don't think that for most people, what they need is advertising revenue so much as more listeners.
That's
and
right.
Swap is just a no-brainer.
We need a rising tides ad network for podcasters where you can get ad reads on other people's shows.
And the big networks do this already, right? If you're in a Wondery podcast subscription, they will not only tell you about another podcast of theirs, they'll actually sometimes stick it into the feed.
Yeah, for real. And I've actually even thought, with Libsyn, they've got dynamic ad insertion in these other companies. Like you can literally rotate ads and it will automatically insert it into every podcast in your catalog. And I was looking at this the other day and I was like, man, what if you had like a network of 100 people paying for ads and you could just rotate through all of each other's podcasts? If you each have 1,000, that's 100,000 people going to hear about you eventually. But, I don't have the tech savviness we'll just build this out off air here and see if we can make some money off this, Andrew. But hey, man, tell everybody real quick where they can find you, where they can check out the Mixergy podcast, man. And also where they can get the book, man. And I just want to tell you, man, I have appreciated this conversation. I've learned so much. I am a podcaster. When people ask me, what do you do for a living? I'm a podcaster and I'm also a podcast fan. And I've always been a big Andrew Warner guy. I love me some Mixergy. Had the great honor to be on the podcast. And man, it's just been such a privilege to hang out with you today. But let everybody know where they can find you.
Thanks. I'd love it if they like these tips and they want more. I'm giving out some of the best tips from the book so that I can get some feedback on it. If you want it, you just go to stopaskingquestions.co, not .com, .co. Stopaskingquestions.co. And of course, if you want to listen to my podcast, just look up Mixergy in your podcast player, Mixergy. See you there.
All right, y'all. That wraps up my interview with Andrew Warner, the host of the Mixergy podcast, the founder of Mixergy.com. As with most of my guests, man, I could have picked his brain and talked for about 2 more hours. But all I'd have done was ask him questions. I got to figure out how to restate my questions into statements, man. I'm going to get that book when it comes out on the market so I can learn how to be a better interviewer, man. But I hope you've enjoyed my interview style today. I hope you enjoy the Shane Sams Show every single week. If you do, could you do me a favor? Head over to Apple Podcasts. Leave me a 5-star review. Don't forget to fill out the review. Tell me what you think about the show. Good or bad, I can take it. But if you love it, tell me what you love about it. If you know somebody I should interview, tell me that too. But go leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you listen on Spotify or another podcast player, make sure you give it a follow, give it a subscribe, download a few episodes to your phone. Heck, share that thing on social media. Tell a friend about the podcast. That really helps us grow the audience, get bigger and better guests, and bring you access to the amazing people you need to learn how to be successful and take your life and business to the next level. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at Shane_Sams. I set up a new personal profile over on Twitter just to communicate with the listeners here at the Shane Sams Show. That's at Shane_Sams. I tweet 2 or 3 times a day all the random redneck Yoda thoughts that are running through my head. And I'd love to hang out with you. Send me a direct message, man. Send me a PM, send me a DM. Heck, tweet and retweet everything I say. I'd love to follow you back. And of course, if you would like to be an entrepreneur, if you'd like to be an online entrepreneur, if you'd like to make money online, heck, maybe you want to be an influencer like some of these experts and authors and entrepreneurs that I bring on the show, I can show you how to do that too. You can learn about everything I've got going on over at ShaneSams.com. Head over to ShaneSams.com. You can see my speaking schedule. I'm going to be out and about all over the country over the next little bit. I'd love to meet you out on the road. Love to hang out with you there. I'd love to help you in any way I can. But for now, we're going to wrap up this show. I'll see you again next week. Thank you so much for listening. Till I'm back, get out there, be consistent, be prolific, be relentless. Cast your stone out upon the waters, cause many ripples. I'll see you then.